It is 35 years since these images shocked the world. Children, often severely malnourished, even emaciated. They'd lived with little heating in unsanitary conditions, some physically abused. Thousands of them locked away in Romania's state institutions, their fate exposed to the world as President Nicolae Ceaușescu was overthrown and executed at the end of 1989. According to the Institute for the Investigation of Communist Crimes and the Memory of the Romanian Exile, 15,000 even lost their lives, mostly in so-called hospitals for children, often misdiagnosed as severely disabled, seen as useless to society, a lost generation closeted away. Well, it happened as Ceaușescu led a policy of economic growth through trying to increase the population. Contraception and abortion were severely restricted, so many people had more children than they could cope with, then leaving them in state care. The problem did not end there. At the age of 18, most of them were sent out to fend for themselves with no support. Well, nowadays, many of the children who suffered are adults still haunted by what happened. Any efforts to have the abuse and deaths recognised have failed due to an alleged lack of evidence. All that as Romania sees a growing nostalgia for communism. Well, Maria Gerth-Niculescu and Bastian Renwi revisit Romania's lost children for France 24.
This is the castle and the former children's medical institution of Cighid, where I grew up. We were sent here to die. We were abandoned and sentenced to death.
This door marks the entrance to Simanca's hell. She was only 3 when her parents left her at a hospital. She was then sent to this centre for children with disabilities, deemed irrecoverable by Ceaușescu's regime.
We went through terrible times, terrible things here in Cighid.
During the communist era, thousands of children were placed in 27 medical institutions. They were abandoned, often after being wrongly diagnosed with cerebral diseases. This happened because of the regime's pro-natalist policies, which banned abortion, and widespread poverty.
This was my bed, right here. And look at what still hurts me the most. These are awful memories. We couldn't tell if it was day or night, just darkness. It was cold, we were naked and covered in our own waste. They never changed our sheets, nor our clothes.
A 138 children died at Cighid, more than 80% of those residing there. According to their death certificates, most died from pneumonia, in secret, out of sight. The only memorial to these children is a few kilometers away, across from the village cemetery. These crosses were put up after the fall of communism.
This monument lists the names of the children who died at Cighid. Most of them passed away before 1989. And as you can see, they died very young.
For 7 years, Florine Soare has been investigating these so-called irrecoverable children. He estimates 15,000 minors died in state-run institutions.
For the communist regime, these children were seen as an unnecessary burden that had to be removed. How did they deal with this burden? By eliminating them physically. As a result, they were cut off from society and brought to these centres with no other purpose than to die.
The victims' bodies were never exhumed. Witnesses say they were buried here, without graves or any religious ceremonies.
From what we know, the children died one after another. They were left to pile up, then taken here to be buried in carts or tractors.
Everyone in the village knew about the horrors of Cighid. But most of the former workers are either dead or won't testify, making the investigation difficult. This woman is one of the few exceptions. She cooked for the children at the centre for 35 years and now claims staff lacked resources and downplays her role.
You knew they were dying, didn't you?
I know they died, but they didn't die of hunger. And they didn't die of cold in summer either.
The death certificates say they mainly died of pneumonia.
Yes, from cold. It was very cold. There was no way to dry the sheets properly. If a healthy person sleeps with wet sheets, how will they feel? Like he had a dry sheet? No, not good. There was no dryer.
Those who are willing to testify often share similar views. Despite the challenges, Florin continues his investigation across Romania.
It's important for us and future generations that the truth comes out. I believe those responsible for these abuses should be held accountable. And I think it's essential for the Romanian state to acknowledge these abuses and for survivors to receive reparations.
The Institute for the Investigation of Communist Crimes has filed 3 complaints, aiming to shed light on the mistreatment and demand compensation for victims.
Here are the death certificates. These documents only cover 3 centres, but they represent almost 2,500 death certificates. Each one marks a child who lost their life in one of these homes. You can see how many of them died in the centres.
2 complaints have already been dismissed by prosecutors. They argue it's impossible to link the deaths to the conditions in the institutions, citing a lack of forensic autopsies. But Florin believes these investigations have been poorly handled.
Many of the victims heard were not relevant, as they had been admitted after 1990. They also heard from parents who claimed the conditions were good in these centres, despite never having visited them. For our team, it was extremely shocking to see that the thousands of documents and pieces of evidence we submitted to these cases were not considered by the prosecutors.
Near Cighid, in the city of Oradea, some survivors have rebuilt their lives. Simanka has little hope of ever seeing justice. Deemed irrecoverable, She was one of the misdiagnosed children.
Oh, I put too much red on. I'll add some white.
It's fine. It's perfect like that.
She's raising Maria and Pavel on her own in a small rented apartment.
I want them to have what I didn't. A mother's love, affection, everything I was missing in my childhood. I want them to have clothes, to be clean, educated. I want them to have everything I didn't have. I want them to have a beautiful childhood.
Simanka's health is fragile. She dreams of one day owning a home so her 2 children will have a place to live if anything goes wrong.
I ask her how I can help, what I can do to make her feel better. Lately, I've been giving her a lot of gifts.
Simanka is teaching Maria to cook so she becomes more independent. But this morning, an unexpected call interrupts their session. It's Simanka's parents.
What are you cooking?
Mushroom pasta.
They've reconnected, but their relationship remains superficial. Few parents knew where their children were. Simanka was 11 when hers finally tried to reach her at Cighid.
I told them, now you come to see me. Now that I'm grown, you need me. Where were you when I needed you? No one held me. I never felt affection. I never knew what motherly love is.
Over time, Simanka has learned to overcome her resentment.
We talk, but we're not very close. I've forgiven them. They're my parents, and I forgive them. God forgives everyone.
Few survivors from these institutions know what it is like to have a real family. Many never saw their parents again and stayed in the centres into adulthood, even after communism ended.
We fought with each other. We stole from one another.
Yes. We lived through the same thing.
It was a fight for survival, the law of the strongest.
Without this association support, these people with disabilities would likely have been left to their own devices.
The staff help us, show us empathy. We listen to them because without that, we wouldn't have survived. We also communicate among ourselves, with Jonji and the others. We understand each other because we shared the same suffering.
These survivors are followed by specialists and now live more or less independently.
They're coping well, especially considering the poor diagnoses from so-called doctors.
Yes, specialist doctors.
Yeah, they're living proof that they were wrong.
Iosif left Cighid in 2002. Since then, he's found a job and tries to live a normal life. He shares an apartment with his roommate Kalin, another survivor. This afternoon, they're hosting friends.
And how is work?
Very good, thank God. You can't forget the wounds, the suffering, the trauma from childhood. Living conditions were bad. But there's no better revenge than knowing we're still alive. There's no need for revenge. They wanted to exterminate us, but we taught them a lesson. We're still standing.
In 2019, prosecutors questioned him for their investigation. The case was dismissed. Iosif can still appeal, but he has reservations about doing so.
By doing that, you enter a battle for justice, but it could destroy you mentally. That's what would happen. I also have to think about my well-being. My conscience, my soul, they would be destroyed.
For now, Iosif and Kalin are trying to heal together. If he decides to appeal, the process could be long. Since Nicolae Ceaușescu was overthrown in 1989, few former communist leaders have faced justice, despite a long list of crimes committed during 4 decades of dictatorship.
Maria Gerf-Niculescu and Bastien Renouy revisiting Romania's lost children for France 24. And that's all for this week's edition. You can find it again on our website at france24.com, all the other editions as well. Thanks for watching.